in my head out loud. Let's get into it, let's pick up the flow though. Brought to you by the one they call JoJo. Black, queer, unapologetic. Black, queer, unapologetic. Let's go.
Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of Black Queer Unapologetic. I am your host, JoJo, and this is the podcast where we dive into real and raw moments that shape us and just speak the truth with raw authenticity. Today, I wanted to talk about something that we all face, but we rarely unpack, which is rejection and how to deal with that rejection. I feel like a lot of people are either afraid to reject someone, basically like being upfront and telling the truth about how they feel about something, or afraid to receive it. And I don't necessarily think that rejection is something that you should be afraid of. I think it's really just redirection and where you should give your attention to and what you should give your attention to. And specifically for Black queer men, I feel like rejection can be everywhere. I face it in dating, at work, in sports, sexually, and even opportunities that you're just passed over for without a second thought. And it doesn't sit well with me. I feel like it doesn't sit well with a lot of other people as well. And it also doesn't just sting in the moment, but it does chip away at you over time. And so I definitely do want to talk about that and how it affects people, not just Black queer men, but anybody who is of a marginalized group that may be rejected for really just being unapologetically who they are, and seeing how that affects you in the spaces that you show up in the world. So today we're going to unpack all of that, the pain, the patterns, and most importantly, how to deal with that rejection in a way that lets you grow from it and not shrink from it. Let's get into it. Let's start with dating, because let's just be honest, it's a jungle out there. I feel like as a Black queer man, rejection is oftentimes wrapped in racism and colorism and body shaming when it comes to dating. There's also the fetishism side of things as well. And how many times have you heard or seen phrases that, you know, I'm not into Black guys, I'm not into insert race, ethnicity, body size, height, etc. into that slot. I'm just not into insert X guys. And seen bios that blatantly exclude a certain group of people or multiple groups of people. And it's not just rejection, it's really erasure, as if these people don't exist. I don't see them. I have no interest in talking to them. I have no interest in anything like that. And I think, you know, this also bleeds over to not just dating, but it's who you surround yourself with. And you can't really expect your world to expand unless your circles expand. And in order to do that, you need multiple types of people around you in order to be able to learn and listen to different viewpoints. I have a very mixed friend group. So I have Black friends, I have Latino friends, I have Asian friends, I have white friends. I have people that in my life that are straight. I have people in my life that are lesbians. I have people in my life that are trans. And everybody's life looks completely different than mine. And, you know, people that are in relationships, the list goes on. But a lot of people prefer to date people who look a certain way. And I feel like that preference, and I'm using that term loosely, oftentimes bleeds into how people present themselves in other aspects of their life, whether that's work, whether that's friendship, whether that's family, the list goes on. And even when we do get past the walls, you know, maybe you're the token Black friend. I've been in that spot. You know, maybe you're the first person that this person has dated that is Black, or maybe the first person that they've slept with that is from a specific background. And then you're wondering, okay, they've never done this, or maybe they've only done this and they've only dated people who look like you and only dated people who are, you know, a certain body type or something like that. And then you start to wonder, is this a fetish? And not really knowing if they like you for you or if they like the aesthetic of what you are and not who you are as a person. And I think that can oftentimes hurt. I feel like the rejection itself it's not about the person saying no. It's not about someone not wanting you. It's about being made to feel like who you are at your core isn't good enough, and also not respecting you enough to just tell you the truth. I use that term preference loosely because my question is, which a lot of people don't necessarily have the answer to, is when does a preference become a requirement? If you are accustomed to always getting your way, let's just say hypothetically that you are only into a specific type of guy. I only date guys that are, I'm just going to say black. I only date black guys. Why do you only date black guys? You've only dated and slept with black guys. And at what point does that preference become a requirement? And are requirements racist? Because people oftentimes like to say that preferences aren't. So at what point does that preference become a requirement? And then is a requirement racist? I really hope that gets people to thinking about preferences versus requirements and rejection. It doesn't stay in one part of your life, unfortunately. So I feel like anytime people have preferences, regardless of whether it's related to anything that's, physical or an aesthetic based thing that leads to rejection, it doesn't just stay in one part of your life. And so dealing with rejection on top of dating, there's work. And I had that episode that I talked about when I got fired, and before I even got fired from that job, I was working in a role that was not equal to what I had applied and interviewed for. And being rejected for a job or a promotion or even an idea can feel like a personal attack, especially when you know that your blackness or your queerness played a role, whether it was conscious or unconscious. To me, that doesn't really matter. People need to check themselves on their perceptions of what people are and are not, or are qualified and unqualified for based on what criteria. The workplace oftentimes rewards conformity. So if you can fit into a box that people deem as acceptable for a type of role or, seniority or, management position or something like that, or even just like the industry that you're in, and not show up authentically as who you are, then you can get those roles. But if you show up being too much, maybe too black, maybe too queer, you might be seen as a risk. You might not be seen as someone who fits into that role and can conform to that mold. And a lot of times people can't fit into those boxes because those boxes were not built for them. It's exhausting for people to expect you to fit into them, and to know that no matter how qualified you are, you might still be passed over because you don't fit into someone else's mold. And it sucks. It definitely does suck. That there is no one way for somebody to dress at work and style their hair, none of that. But you can still be rejected for jobs. You can still be passed over for promotions, and it happens a lot. Like, I see it all the time, unfortunately. But because it's really hard to prove, it can be frustrating because how do you prove it? No one's going to tell you to your face that they rejected you because you're a loud black person. Or no one's going to tell you to your face that they rejected you because they feel like your hair is unprofessional, because everybody knows that stuff is wrong. Everybody knows that it's wrong. Nobody wants to tell you to your face. And so we have to learn how to accept the redirection away from things that are not for us. If somebody doesn't like that you're maybe too flamboyant at work, or they don't like your hair, or they don't like the way that you dress, maybe you shouldn't be there. And being okay with walking out of a room that was not built for you. Rejection sometimes is just a sign to let you know that you do not belong in that space. And instead of trying to fit into a space that is going to cause you frustration and anger and annoyance, just go elsewhere. There's plenty of places that want you and need you and will appreciate you for being who you are. You do not need to go and kiss somebody's ass to be accepted. and get on your knees and beg for a job, or get on your knees and beg for somebody to date you or like you. No, go find somebody who actually gives a damn about you and wants you in the room or wants to be with you. Those are the things that you should be looking for, because those are the things that are going to make you happy. It's pretty simple. The rejection itself, like, it definitely can hurt, but at the same time, why would you want to deal with somebody who's going to treat you that way or speak to you that way or think of you in that way? Another thing I really want to touch on, because I've been doing this for a while and I feel like a lot of people have just started to get into this area, and that's gay sports leagues. So I used to play a lot of softball. I grew up playing baseball, and within, over the years, like, you get a certain level of skill, but that just comes with practice and things like that. And eventually I stopped playing baseball and I discovered gay softball. And then after softball, I discovered many other LGBTQ sports leagues. So there's, and for anybody out there who's listening and you need to make friends, this is probably a really good way to do it. But there's softball leagues, there's kickball leagues, basketball, flag football, and there's all different levels of experience. But one thing that I've learned and seen with people who either have joined these leagues and that play really well, or people who don't necessarily have like the athletic experience, that are just joining for the social aspect, which is totally fine, is rejection in those spaces as well. And there's this idea that somehow being more masculine or being more athletic is more sought after. It's like more attractive. And I consider myself to be attracted to athletic people, but it's not necessarily within a sport. It's more for people who can use their body in a way that is useful. So, like, can you throw things? Can you run fast? Can you jump? For me, it's about the functionality. I don't care what you look like. You can be a thick person, you can be a thinner person, you can be a tall person, a short person. But I find the ability to use your body in a way that is skillful and tactful very attractive, versus someone who looks aesthetically pleasing and cannot do anything. Very uncoordinated, no hand-eye coordination whatsoever. I don't find that attractive at all. And I don't use the term fit because I find it really ridiculous that fitness is determined based on a physical appearance and aesthetic. Just because somebody looks a certain way doesn't make them any fit or less fit than the person next to them. And a lot of times people just don't realize that. So that's all I'm going to say about that, because that's a different conversation. But within these sports and athletic spaces, hypermasculinity is celebrated. And so if you are maybe somebody who might be more on the feminine end of the spectrum, you are not seen as someone who is good enough. Or if you're a Black person on a team, it's expected that, like, oh, you're this tall Black person, you're probably really good, probably so athletic. I've also gotten that. People just look at me and think that I'm a certain way, which unfortunately I fit into a stereotype of an athletic Black person, but everybody does not fit those stereotypes. And it's kind of strange to me that in queer athletic spaces, that hypermasculinity is so celebrated. And I've also seen it in situations where there are folks that have played the sport for a really long period of time, but they may be on a team with someone who doesn't have that experience. And as a result, they make that experience a negative one for that newer person. And that's a damn shame, because these sports leagues were created because queer people were not welcomed into a lot of these athletic spaces. And so we made our own, which I am 100% a supporter of, because if you don't have a space for yourself, then just go make one. But it sucks when there are people who have this hyper-masculine attitude about being good at sports, and they don't want to play someone who might be more effeminate on the that end of the spectrum, or they don't want to play somebody who might not be as good or seasoned as a player. And there's nothing wrong with any of that. And so that rejection, it sucks too, because it makes people not want to come back, and it makes people not able to like learn the sport, learn the rules, that kind of thing, get better. Nobody likes to suck at something, but like, it's to be celebrated if you do something well. It is to be celebrated, and it makes people feel good about themselves. And so I've like dedicated some of my time in the past to coaching and teaching people how to play the sport, rather than yelling at them and complaining about how bad somebody was, and trying to give them the tools and resources in order to make them better, but never try to change who they are as a person. I'm like, that's who you are, then that's who you are. I don't have a problem with that. But if you have the drive to want to learn things, I will teach you. And I've always celebrated that with folks. But then I think it also sets a bad example when it comes to people who are not accepted into these spaces, whether it be a straight athletic space or it might be a queer athletic space. But it sets a bad example for the behavior that is acceptable. And I hate that, because sportsmanship is a big thing for me. So nobody should be having a bad experience playing any of these sports, especially when those sports and athletic spaces were created by a community that you belong to. So going back to the dating thing and then into the athletic space, being rejected as a queer person or a Black person, you get that from the rest of the world. But I don't need that from communities that I belong to, that, I signed up to play this sport, and because you think I'm not good enough or whatever it is, that I don't belong in that space. As queer people, we definitely have to do better with that, about rejecting people in our community because of what they look like, or because of their athletic ability, or because you have some type of predetermined sexual dating athletic requirement from somebody. Those are your expectations that you have to manage from yourself. Do not project that stuff on anybody else, because again, we get that from everybody else in the world. We don't need that from our own community. The last place I want to talk about rejection, or where we face rejection in, is in the bedroom. So let's get a little bit more intimate. Sexual rejection can be very layered. I know for me, as a Black queer man, rejection in the bedroom can feel tied to stereotypes and assumptions about my body, about my masculinity, about my sexual prowess, or whatever the fuck somebody assumes about me by looking at me, or stereotypes that they heard about Black people in the bedroom. Whether it's on the apps, whether it's to your face. I know for me personally, I've experienced people just sending me messages about, BBC ? Or I know you have a fat ass. Just stupid assumptions about me, about what I am in the bedroom. They look at you and they think, okay, tall Black man, like he has to be a top. You have to fit into this mold. And each person faces their own stereotypes that they have to deal with. And when they don't fit those stereotypes or those expectations people have built for us in society, then that can lead to rejection. And unfortunately, we don't have control over that. We don't have control over the stereotypes that, people want to put us in. We don't have control over whether or not someone is going to feed into those stereotypes or not. I can't change the fact that I'm Black. I also can't change the fact that I'm tall. I can't change the fact that I'm thick. So if somebody looks at me and adds those three things together and decides to come up with some concoction of what I am, and then they're disappointed and they want to reject me from it, that has nothing to do with me. That has everything to do with them, because nobody told them to do that. They just assumed that I was going to be all these things because that's what their brain has been trained to assume. And it's pretty ridiculous. On the other side of things, I've seen the opposite. Pretty recently, there was somebody who messaged me on Grindr, and I guess throughout our dialogue of messages, they determined that I could not perform the way that they wanted me to. And that was based on their assumption of their stereotype of a Black person that fits my description and the dialogue that they have with me via text messages. And I'm just like, okay, like, I mean, I really don't care. I've done a lot of work over the past 7 years with rejection and how I approach it. And I do consider myself a control freak. However, I am fully aware that I can't control other people's behavior. So I just don't even try. That's not my responsibility to help somebody manage their stereotypical expectations of my appearance or what they think I should or should not be in their eyes or in the bedroom for that matter. And I think it goes both ways. If someone's going to reject you for a stereotype, you should just move on. Pack up your shit and move on. Get over it. Don't deal with that person. But also don't make yourself so small to that when you do fit into those stereotypes and they do want you, that it is borderlining fetishization, that you put up with it because it feels better to be wanted than to be rejected. That is also another form of disrespect. And honestly, I feel like they are more approving of a stereotype that you might fit into, unfortunately, than being into you as a person or interested in you as a person. It is more being interested in the idea of you because you fit into a certain stereotype, unfortunately. And that's not going to last. That shit's fleeting. So it really goes both ways. Don't buy into the rejection. Don't overthink it. Just, pack up your shit, move on. But if somebody else is all about it, they're super interested in you. We want to hire you because you fit this stereotype of what we think this role is, that this, sexual position is, this ethnicity is, this partner that I have concocted in my head. That has nothing to do with you and all about their expectations of a stereotype of you that they've built inside their head. And that doesn't feel good either. Because the reality is, it makes you replaceable. If something goes wrong, if this person doesn't get their way, and, they found their perfect stereotype of what they were looking for, and something is not adding up for them, they will go and get somebody else who also fits that stereotype to replace you. Do not make yourself small to fit into somebody else's box that they created for you so that you can get what you want, because you're giving your power away. And nobody should be giving their power away to people who do not appreciate them. And I know rejection hurts, and oftentimes we just want to avoid it. We want to avoid talking about it. We want to avoid confronting it. But when you do that, it has deeper impacts, and it plants these seeds of doubt and insecurity and sometimes shame in you. And you start to internalize the no's as proof that you're not good enough or that something's wrong with you. And I'm just going to tell you right now is that rejection isn't about your worth. It's about someone's inability to see it. And while that might not make it hurt any less, it's the truth. And when you come to terms with that, this has nothing to do with your worth and more about somebody's inability to see it, and that is a fact, then it will make it easier for you to accept the rejection for what it is and move on. And there's always going to be better. There's going to be somebody that's going to accept you and see your worth, but you got to be patient. You got to be patient. And you're probably thinking like, well, how do I deal with this rejection? And JoJo, I've been through yada, yada, yada. Well, I've had many jobs and I've been rejected for a lot of them that I've applied for in the past. I was unemployed for 6 months. I applied for countless jobs and many rejection emails that came through. I've also been single for 7 years. I've dated a lot. There's also been a lot of rejection in that. And I've just had to learn how to deal with rejection in a positive way that is building me up and not breaking me down. And also forcing myself to have those tough conversations. I'd rather somebody reject me to my face and take it for what it is than to wonder if somebody sees the value in me or is interested in me. And so people hate this, but I'm not afraid of tough conversations. I think it's just the way that I am these days. And so if someone is acting wishy-washy, I just ask them straight up, like, are you still interested in this? Or why did this happen? Or why did that happen? And people hate it. But when you confront somebody with a direct question, it oftentimes like forces those conversations to happen. I find value in them. I'm not telling anybody else to do that, but I found value in it. Recently, I had a fuck buddy who decided that they no longer wanted to hook up with me. And they were not giving me a reason. So they were like, oh, like, yeah, I'd rather not, like, hook up, but like we can go do this or that. Like, it was basically more platonic stuff. And so I asked the question, I was like, oh, like, that's fine with me. I'm not like upset about it, but I'm curious as to why. They weren't going to tell me why. And so that kind of forced them to bring it up. And they said that they weren't as physically attracted to me anymore as they initially were. I'm like, okay, I mean, I can't change that, whatever. But also, I'm not into forcing connections. And so because me and this person were not friends before, I didn't see there being any value in us spending time together to go get like lunch or dinner or hang out. And so I was like, well, like, that's fine. We actually don't need to force a connection in any way. So it doesn't need to be sexual or romantic or platonic. And I just told him, I was like, dude, if I see you around, like, I'll say what's up, but we don't need to pretend like we're going to be friends and, force hangouts and things like that. He ended up being fine with it, or, I mean, as far as I know, but I was also fine with it too. I mean, what am I supposed to do? Like, throw myself at him and beg to continuously hook up with this person? And at some point they were into it, but whatever it was, they decided that it was no longer for them. And that's fine. I don't have control over that. So I just let it go. Don't let these things get under your skin. There's always going to be another job. There's always going to be somebody else to date. There's always going to be somebody else to sleep with. There's also going to be more friends for you to make. There's also going to be, new opportunities for you. So none of this should be bothering you to a point where you doubt yourself, because as life goes on, more opportunities will come. But you're probably thinking like, Jojo, well, what do I do? Because the rejection hurts. I'm like, yeah, no shit. It does hurt, but you got to make sure that you get over it. And I think there's probably 4 things that you can do to deal with it in a positive way so that the rejection doesn't break you or really just hurt your ego. And I think if you can do those 4 things, that it will definitely be beneficial for you reframing what the direction rejection is taking you in is. First and foremost, we're all human. So you need to let yourself feel the rejection. Yes, it's going to hurt. It might hurt more than others. It depends on what it was about. But it's okay to admit that it hurt you. But don't let it define you. The second thing, reframe it. Instead of seeing rejection as a loss, see it as redirection. What's meant for you is not going to miss you. And sometimes a no is just clearing the way for something better to come along that is more suitable for you. The third thing, find your people. I feel like this is the most important one. Surround yourself with folks who see you, who value you, and remind you of your worth when you forget it. Because sometimes we do forget our own worth. And I think the last thing, and I got this from my therapist, is to practice self-compassion. Rejection isn't proof that you're unworthy. It's proof that you're human. These things are a part of life. It happens. So be kind to yourself as you navigate through the journey of getting rejected, because it's gonna happen. It happens to everybody, regardless of what you look like or where you come from. And that's all I have to say about rejection. It is hard, but it's not the end of your story, and it's just one chapter in the book that's still being written for you. So just make sure that you learn to deal with it in a healthy way. The next time you hear somebody say no to you, remember that you are worthy, you are enough, and you don't need anybody's validation to be whole. Find that within yourself. So as we wrap up here, I just want to thank you again for joining me on Black Queer Unapologetic. If this episode resonated with you, share it with someone who you think needs to hear it. And as always, let me know your thoughts, your stories, and how you're personally turning rejection into growth. Until next time, stay Black, stay queer, and if you're neither, stay unapologetic. I will see you next time. Bye.